You want to spotlight yourself?
Okay, maybe I'll spotlight. Spotlight for everyone?
Yes.
Maybe I just do it this way. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And today is September 14th, 2024. And so we can begin, we can do 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then I will start with the salutation. 1 time. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. So we'll be continuing with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, that's the Numerical Discourses of the Buddha, and we are still in the Book of Sixes. And now we'll take Sutta number 59. It's not a particularly profound sutta, but it's interesting from a particular point of view. And I think it's almost as a touch of a little bit of sarcastic humor in this sutta. Okay, so the sutta opens, the Buddha is dwelling at a place called Nadika, and then a householder named Daru Kamika. Actually, Daru is wood and Kama is work. So Daru Kamika would be one who works with wood, could be a carpenter. Oh, I see. The name here is like a dealer in firewood. And the commentary says he was so named because he earns his living by selling firewood. Okay, so he approaches the Buddha, pays homage to him and sits down. And then the Buddha says to him, it's a bit strange for the Buddha to be asking somebody this question, but he asks them, does your family give gifts? In other words, do they give gifts or make offerings to the monastics? And then this householder, Darukamika, replies, my family gives gifts, and those gifts are given to bhikkhus, to monks who are arahats, or on the path to arahatship, those who are forest dwellers, alms food collectors, and wearers of rag robes. You see, I think that there's an underlying purpose behind this sutta, and that is to clear up a particular kind of misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding is that the mark of being an arahat, a liberated one, is undertaking the practice of certain types of practices that are called dhutangas, or ascetic practices. And so this householder, Darukamika, is making a judgment, a determination that the monks that he's giving offerings to are arhats, or on the path to arhatship. And for him, the reason that he can make that determination about those monks is because they have adopted some of these ascetic observances. And the 3 that are mentioned here is being a forest dweller, an alms food collector, and a wearer of rag robes. And in these suttas, and even more in the commentaries, we find these lists of ascetic practices that were permitted by the Buddha. The Buddha is sometimes thought that the Buddha rejected asceticism, but that is not correct. What the Buddha rejected is the idea that self-mortification, deliberately inflicting pain and misery upon oneself, is a means to enlightenment, a means to liberation. And so the Buddha rejected some of the extreme types of ascetic practices that were common amongst the renunciants of his own time, practices like undertaking long fasts, sleeping on beds of thorns, exposing one's body to the heat of the sun in the middle of the day during the hot season, and going naked, especially during the cold season. But the Buddha did allow certain ascetic practices to which some of the monastics might have been inclined. And this text mentions three of those. And one is being a forest dweller. And this is opposed to living in a temple, a monastery that might be within a town or a city, or on the outskirts of a town or city or village. Okay, so that is one ascetic practice. Forest dwelling, as we'll see, versus dwelling in a village temple, a village monastery. A second ascetic practice, here it's translated as being an alms food collector. And this means that you make the vow, the determination to support to maintain oneself exclusively by means of food collected on alms round. So this is a common practice in the Buddha's time, and it even continues today in the countries of Southeast Asia, the Theravada Buddhist countries, where monks will go from house to house or walking down the street, and lay people will come with the offerings of food, and they'll put them into the bowl of the monk, and then the monk will go back, often they'll go back to their temple or monastery and then consume the food there. So that is being an alms food collector. And this is contrasted with, as we'll see in this sutta, accepting invitations to meals at the houses of lay people. And so those who make the vow to become an alms food collector will not accept invitations to houses for the meal. But now in Buddhist countries, there are other models of offering the food that have come to prevail. Okay, one of them, so here we have a contrast between living on alms food and accepting invitations to houses. But yeah, the dominant model that I found in Sri Lanka was that lay people will reserve a particular day, could be a day, one day each month, or a day in the calendar year, in which they will come to the temple to offer the food. So that's a third model that's not mentioned here. So the lay people will prepare the food, and then on that particular day that they've reserved, they'll come to the temple or monastery and then offer the food to the monks living there. So that's a third model in between collecting alms food and accepting invitations to houses. And there was even a kind of hybrid model that I found at some monasteries. This is what you might call an arranged alms round. So at a monastery where I was living for a period called Nisaranavanaya, lay people would come from often from distant villages. They would come to the monastery the night before, and they spend the night at the monastery. In the early morning, they prepare the breakfast, and they send the breakfast up to the dining hall for the monks. But then in the late morning, like about 10:30 a.m., the monks come down, walking down from their residential area. They come down to the kitchen area where the lay people have prepared the food, but they walk as if on alms round. So they roll up the robes in the formal style, carry the alms bowl, walk very serenely in a single file, And the lay people will be lined up with the food they've prepared. One will have the rice, the other will have various curry dishes. And then the monks will walk by, and the lay people will put the offerings each into the bowl of each monk as they walk by. And then the monks will go back up the steps to the dining area, and then they'll take their meal in the dining area. So that we would consider, I call this an arranged alms round. It's quite different from the sort of natural or spontaneous alms round, where you don't have any prearrangement, but you just go by chance from house to house amongst the villages, and then people will come out and offer whatever they have prepared. So that is the practice of alms food collection. And now, say in countries like Thailand, Myanmar, probably Cambodia, with the alms round, you're pretty much assured of coming back with a full alms bowl. But in India, during the Buddha's time, when the monks are walking over, large tracts of India and coming to villages where people are not expecting you, if they don't expect you to be coming, they might not have anything really substantial to offer. So there might be just some leftover rice from the day before, a little bit of a chapati or kind of flatbread, maybe a little bit of old dal curry from the day before that they might just quickly heat up, or they might not have anything at all. So when you go on alms round, even though if people are expecting you, you're likely to get a very full bowl, but if the people are not expecting you, you could come back with just a few meager offerings and sometimes with an empty bowl. There's even some reports in the suttas where the Buddha went on alms round and came back with an empty bowl. Okay, so this is the practice of alms food collection. And the third ascetic practice here is said to be wearing rag robes. So this is a way in the ancient times, many of the monks would make their robe. So what they would do, they would go sort of traveling around looking for pieces of cast off cloth. Sometimes on the roadside, you would find pieces of discarded cloth, and you take these pieces of cloth, you cut them out, cut out patches, and you sew them together to form a robe. And then in the formal style, and then you dye it using usually the bark of trees, the wood from trees, and then you dye it some kind of brown or orange brown, rust colored. And another way in which some of the monks would prepare the rag robes, they would go to the charnel ground, and in the charnel ground, people would wrap the corpse in a cloth, usually a white cloth, and I think these would be the bodies of maybe criminals who had been executed, and they just throw the body in the charnel ground to be, devoured by jackals and wild dogs and hawks and other kinds of birds of prey, and eventually by worms. And so the monks would go to the charnel ground and they would find some of these shrouds that we, excuse me, the shrouds that we used to wrap the corpses, and they would cut off pieces of cloth and then sew them together into a robe and then dye them this ochre or brownish color. And that would be contrasted with the use of ready-made robes. Here they're called robes made by householders. So in the ancient times, lay people would make the robes themselves, following the instructions of the monks. and dye the robe and then offer them to the monks. Nowadays, in the Buddhist countries, they have stores, they call them Dharma shops, where you can go into the Dharma shop. If you want to offer a robe to a monastery or to a monk, you buy the ready-made robe and you get a whole variety of colors, from bright orange through reddish brown, through olive colored to dark brown. So you choose the color that the monks that you want to offer the robe to, the color that they prefer, and then you can offer the robe to them. But sort of the ideal practice, which is held up, is that of following these practices of being a forest dweller, an alms food collector, and wearing the robes sewed from rags. Okay, so this layperson, Daru Kamika, comes to the conclusion that the mark of the Arahat is being a forest dweller, alms food collector, and wearing rag robes. And then the Buddha reproaches him in a gentle way, and he says, "You are a layman enjoying sensual pleasures." This is a stock phrase. Living at home in a house full of children, using sandalwood from Kasi, that is Benares, wearing garlands, scents, and unguents, receiving gold and silver. So it's difficult for you to know these are arahats, or those on the path to arhatship. And then the Buddha is going to draw a contrast here and to show that we could use the modern expression, you can't judge a book by its cover. And so here you have a monk who is a forest dweller, and so you layperson dwelling at home, you might think, he's a forest dweller. He must be an arahat, or one seriously practicing the way to arahatship. But those who know him well know that he is really restless, puffed up, vain, talkative, muddle-minded. He lacks sampajanya, clear comprehension. Yeah, he's muddle-minded. That means literally that he lacks mindfulness. He lacks sampajanya, clear comprehension. Unconcentrated, he lacks samadhi. With a wandering mind, again, he lacks samadhi. With loose sense faculties, the sense faculties are wandering here and there in search of agreeable objects. So even though the monk is a forest dweller, if he has those undesirable qualities, then in that respect, he is blameworthy. Okay, but if he is a forest dweller, but he is not restless, puffed up and vain, and so on, but he has mindfulness established, he has clear comprehension, he's concentrated with a unified mind, he's restrained in the sense faculties, then in that respect, he's praiseworthy. It doesn't mean that you could conclude he's an arahat, but just the fact that he has mindfulness, clear comprehension, restraint of the sense faculties, in that respect, he's praiseworthy. And then the same thing applies, here we have the contrast, one who dwells on the outskirts of a village. So this is the opposite of the forest dweller, one who dwells close to a village. And so you might think if he's dwelling close to a village or inside the village, that he's blameworthy, he's just a worldly monk. But if he's restless, without mindfulness and clear comprehension and so on, then in that respect he's blameworthy. But if he's dwelling on the outskirts of the village, but he is not restless, He has clear comprehension, mindfulness, concentration. In that respect, he's praiseworthy. Then we have the same contrast with regard to the alms food collector, the one who accepts invitations to meals, and the same contrast with the one who wears rag robes and the one who wears robes given by householders. One of each of these types might be restless without mindfulness and clear comprehension, and in that respect they are blameworthy, or they might have mindfulness, clear comprehension, restraint of the sense faculties, and in that respect they are praiseworthy. Okay, but then the Buddha makes, well, at least the text, the Buddha in the text makes an important concluding remark. So he says, instructs the householder to give gifts to the Sangha. So now what he's saying in effect, previously the householder was giving gifts with the intention that those gifts should go to particular monastics. But now he's saying, give gifts to the Sangha. So when you're giving gifts to the Sangha, you're still giving to individual monastics, but you're doing so with a different frame of mind, a different intention in the mind. So you're not giving with the intention, I give to this monk because they have such and such qualities. I'm not giving to that monk because I don't like their qualities. This is the monk or nun that my family supports. This monk or nun is a stranger to me. I don't support them. But here, the Buddha is saying you give gifts with the intention, I'm giving to the Sangha. And then when you give gifts to the Sangha, then your mind will be confident or have trust in the Sangha. And so now you're no longer selecting individuals, but you're giving to the entire Sangha, even when you're giving to individual monastics, but you're giving to them as representatives of the entire Sangha. And so then when you give gifts to the entire Sangha, then your mind will be confident. And when your mind is confident, then with the breakup of the body after death, you'll be reborn in a good destination in a heavenly world. The Buddha doesn't say that when you give gifts to the Sangha, you're going to reach the path and fruit of stream entry, once returning, non-returning, or arhatship, since simply the giving of gifts, it generates powerful merit, but it's not sufficient to bring realization. For that, you have to go further and develop calm and insight. But by giving gifts to the Sangha with a mind of confidence, then you create a great mass of merit that leads to a happy rebirth. And then the lay person, Darukamika, says, from today onward, I will give gifts to the Sangha. So now he's going to abandon that practice of choosing particular monks based on their ascetic practices and give without discrimination, with the idea that he is giving to the entire Sangha. Okay, this is a short sutta, and I just wanted to bring it up just for a quick overview, just so that you can get the impression of some of these ascetic practices and get the important message, I think, that comes through here, is that when you want to make offerings, you shouldn't select particular monastics and think, I'm going to give to them because I like them or because I'm impressed by their practices. But the ideal way to make the offerings is to give with the intention, I'm giving to the entire Sangha through those particular monastics. Okay, let us see if we have some. I just saw some hand come up. Okay, so I wanted to go through the sutta quickly, but we'll just take 3 questions. So this will be Mariam.
Thank you, Bhante. I had heard before that when you give gifts, the merit is higher if you're giving it to a more established, more higher in terms of like if they are a stream entry or arahant or something, the merit would be more than if you give it to someone that it's not an arahant or is not a stream entrer or is not a monastic person. Is that something you can shed more light?
That is
Please.
said in certain. That is said in certain suttas. Particularly, there's a sutta. Let me see if I get the number correctly. It's in the Majjhima Nikaya, 141. I think it's 142. Number 142. There's a kind of scale for the merits of making offerings. And so if you make an offering to an ordinary monastic, the merit has a certain level. If you make the offering to a stream enterer, the quantity of merit goes up. Then when you make it to a once returner, it's maybe 10 times, 100 times greater, to a non-returner, still greater, to an arahat, still greater. So there is such a scale, but that same sutta says that making offerings to the Sangha is always, the merit is always greater than making offerings to individuals. So there's a contrast between the offering to the individual and the based on their supposed spiritual worth, and the offering to the Sangha taken as a whole, as a complete community.
So
and in the sutta, the Buddha says, even if the conduct of the members of the Sangha is very, corrupt, degraded, but when you make the offerings with the intention that it's going to the Sangha, the merit is greater than the offerings given to individuals. And so a practice that is done in Sri Lanka, that I observed in Sri Lanka, when people invite, say, the monks, a group of monks to their home for a meal offering, the formula for the offering that will be recited by the monks that the lay people repeat is that we make this offerings to the entire Sangha going back to the time of Sariputta, Moggallana, Maha Kotthita, Ananda, going through, through the centuries right up to the present day.
So a safe bet is to just give to Sangha rather than individual.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you,
we take Samangi.
Yes, Bhante, thank you. So you said if the person is giving to the Sangha and their mind is, I don't know, happy because of that. What if you go to a establishment where there are monks and from whatever the behavior, your mind is not peaceful and calm, and basically what you did does not give you any serenity. So in that case, should you find another place to give, or you give saying, I'm still giving to the Sangha, or how do you?
I think you have to find a place where your mind feels calm and peaceful and happy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Hiranti de Silva.
Thank you, Bhante. My question is, these days it's very difficult for us to find out who are
I'm not getting the sound so clearly.
Aren't you?
Can you get either closer to the mic or boost up the volume in some way?
Wait, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, try again. Okay.
Can you hear me now, please, Bhante?
Yeah, I can hear. Remember that we had some kind of device that I could put in my ear. I don't see that here. Okay, just speak.
Yeah, these days it's very difficult to find out which monks are more developed or who have attained or anything. So when you go to the closest temple where you can see the monks, so therefore you give all the monks. So are you saying that you need to do some research?
She asked you if we need to do research to figure out which answer to give to.
Yeah, no, don't do research.
Yeah. So,
Okay, I want to move on now to the next sutta, which is quite an interesting one. Okay, so this sutta doesn't directly involve the Buddha himself, though it points out that when the sutta begins, the Buddha is dwelling at Varanasi. Actually, this is interesting, at Varanasi in the deer park at Isipatana. So this is a place actually where the Buddha began his teaching mission. Okay, so it says that on that occasion, after their meal, there were a number of elder monks were sitting together in a pavilion hall, and they were having some discussion about the Dhamma. Okay, and while they were holding their discussion, a certain monk named Citta Hatti Sariputta, this isn't the great Sariputta, but this is just part of his name, was repeatedly interrupting their discussion. And then the Venerable Maha Kotthita, was one of the foremost disciples of the Buddha, one who was excelled in the analytical knowledges. So he reproached this monk, Citta Hatti Sariputta. Apparently, Citta Hatti Sariputta was a young monk. I'll just to avoid having to say this long name, I'll just call him the Venerable Citta. Okay, so he told the Venerable Citta, he's saying, when the elder monks are engaged in some discussion on the Dhamma, don't repeatedly interrupt their talk, but if you have something to say, wait until their discussion is finished. Okay, so when this was said, then the Venerable Citta's friends said to the Venerable Maha Kotthita, don't disparage the Venerable Citta. He is wise and capable of engaging with the elder monks in a discussion on the Dhamma. I have to say, from my own point of view, I don't know why they should prevent this Venerable Citta from interjecting with his own point of view. I mean, as long as there's a pause in the discussion, he should be entitled, in my opinion, to say, I have an idea of my own that I want to share with you. Let me know what you think. But apparently, my guess would be that he was being somewhat rude in interrupting their discussion. Okay, so now the Venerable Maha Kotthita says that it's difficult for those who don't know the ways of another's mind, who's unable to read the dispositions in the mind of another person, to know this. And then he's going to elaborate. And this is where we get to the some interesting points. Okay, we have a person who appears to be extremely mild, humble, and calm, so long as he's staying near the teacher, and the teacher with a capital T, this is the Satta, that is referring to the Buddha. So long as he's staying near the Buddha or a fellow monk in the position of a teacher, would be some elder monk who is serving as a teacher. Okay, but then when he leaves the presence of the Buddha or some other monk who's serving as a teacher, then he'll start getting intimate with other monks, with bhikkhunis, that's nuns, with male and female lay followers, with kings and royal ministers, with the sectarian teachers, that is, the teachers from the outside sects, the non-Buddha sects, and the disciples of the other teachers, the non-Buddhist teachers. So he bonds with them, becomes intimate with them, and then he loses his restraint. He loses his mildness, his humility, his calmness, and he starts talking loosely to them. And then lust invades his mind. And with his mind invaded by lust, he gives up the training and returns to what is called hinaya avatati. So literally it means he returns to what is low, what is inferior. I'm sorry to say, but that means returning to the lay life, to the household life. So he gives up the monastic life and returns to the household life. I mean, I've seen this many, many times in the course of my own life as a monk. So we have sometimes a monk who will be very, very, as soon as he gets ordained, he'll start meditating very, very diligently, like 20 hours a day, and maybe 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, meditating very, very diligently. But then they sort of burn out of that energy, that inspiration and energy. It gets exhausted. And then they start getting a little bit looser and start going out and associating with others. And then the associations become more frequent. The amount of time given to the meditations that's getting reduced, shorter and shorter, taking more vacations from meditation, and maybe not associating with kings and royal ministers. Yeah, but some of them actually, well, I know of monks in Sri Lanka who get close to presidents and ministers of state, and even monks who run in parliament in Sri Lanka. I think in the upcoming Sri Lankan presidential election, I believe that there are 2 monks who are running for president of the country. Okay, so in this case, we have the monk who loses his mildness, humility, and lust or attachment invades his mind, and he gives up the training and returns to the household life. And then for each of these cases that is going to be mentioned, there comes a simile. So here we have the simile is a bull that eats crops, and it's tied up by a rope or it's enclosed in a pen, so it can't go out into the field and eat the crops. But you can't draw the conclusion that this bull will never again go out and eat the crops. And why is that? Because it's possible that this bull will break the rope, or it'll break out from the pen, and again it will go out into the field and will eat the crops. So that is the simile for the person who seems to be mild and restrained. That is like the bull kept in the pen. But when the person sort of gets away from the presence of the Buddha or the senior monks, and then he starts meeting with others, then he loosens up like the bull breaking out from the pen, eating the crops. Okay, then we have the same kind of formula applied to each of the jhanas, and this is quite significant. So we have a person who is actually, it has the sutta has the full formula for the first jhana, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states of mind. He enters and dwells in the first jhana. And so you might think first jhana is a kind of deep samadhi, and there's no active arising of sensual thoughts, sensual desires. And so this person might think that they're secure, that they've, reached a place of stability. And so they think, I am attaining the first jhana. And then they start getting intimate with other monks, nuns, female and female lay followers, and so on. And then they loosen up, and then in time, lust invades the mind, and then they give up the training and return to the household life. And then we come to the simile. Okay, so here we have a crossroads, and the crossroads is covered with dust. But then rain starts falling, heavy rain, and so it makes the dust settle and mud appears. And so can one say that the dust will never arise again at that crossroads? And of course the answer is certainly not, because it's possible that people or vehicles will pass through the crossroads, or the rain will stop, the sun will come out, dry up the water, and then the dust will reappear. And so I guess the rain that settles the dust, that will be like the power of the samadhi of the first jhana that settles the unwholesome sensual thoughts that arise in the mind. But when the person sort of discards their regular practice of the jhana and then starts associating loosely with various kinds of people, that is like the sun drying up the moisture, and then the dust reappears. That is like the lustful thoughts that arise in the mind and motivate that person to drop out from the renunciate life and return to the household life. Okay, the next case, we have the same basic formula applied to the second jhana. And again, we have a simile. It's a little bit strange. So here we have, near a village or town, there's a large pond. And apparently in the pond, the text uses a word which is usually translated as oysters or shells. But I don't think in ponds you would get shells of shellfish. So I don't know what this could mean, but you have gravels and pebble. So when the rain falls on this large pond, it makes the gravel and pebbles disappear. But can you ever say that the shells, the gravel and pebbles will never reappear in this pond? And the answer is certainly not, because it's possible that the wind and the heat will dry up that moisture, and then the gravel and pebbles will reappear. So that is, again, it's like the person, after they leave the samadhi of the second jhana, they start associating with other people, then the lustful thoughts reappear in the mind. Okay, we have the same thing with the third jhana. And then we have the simile. So we could say that, like, after you have eaten a full, delicious meal, so can you draw the conclusion that you'll never get hungry again? Sometimes after you eat a full meal with varieties of food, you think, I never want to eat again. I think I had this experience a few days ago. So I never want to eat again. But then time goes on. And then after that meal gets digested and the stomach has been empty for some time, then you start thinking about delicious Indian cuisine or Chinese cuisine or Italian food or Korean food, and then the food starts to appeal to you again. Okay, so that again illustrates how that desire for food reappears. That illustrates how the lust starts to appear in the mind again, even though the person attains the third jhana. Then we have the example of the case of the meditator who attains the fourth jhana. This is the highest of the material sphere absorptions. And this one thinks, I am one who gains the fourth jhana, and he starts to associate with other people. And as he bonds with them, becomes intimate with them, talks to them, in time, gradually, lust invades his mind. And then invaded by lust, he gives up the training and returns to the household life. And the simile given here is that of in a mountain glen, there is a lake sheltered from the wind and devoid of waves, completely still. The surface of the lake is completely still. In a way, that's a good simile for the fourth jhana, which all of the coarser mental factors, thought and examination, joy, even pleasant feeling, have stopped, and the mind has become completely equanimous, calm, equanimous, just like the lake removed from the wind, where the wind has stopped, devoid of waves. But can one rightly say that waves will never again reappear on this lake? And the answer is certainly not, because a rainstorm, you don't even have to say a rainstorm, but even strong winds can appear from any of the directions and stir up waves on the lake. And so even though you attain the fourth jhana, if you leave your regular practice, leave seclusion, and start mixing indiscriminately with people and talking to them loosely, then in time, these unwholesome thoughts can arise and you give up the training and return to the household life. And then we have the sixth case, and this is a bit unusual. We have reference here to a kind of samadhi, which is called, here I translated, it's called the animita ceto samadhi. Here I translated the markless mental concentration, but other translators have used the signless mental concentration. And it's a little puzzling what exactly this refers to, because it's not a kind of world transcending samadhi, because as we'll see, one can fall away from this. And so the commentary, we'll look at the note. The commentary identifies this markless concentration as the concentration of strong insight. So in Pali, it's balava vipassana samadhi. And so when the mind is deeply focused, in this case, on the impermanence of ever-changing phenomena, it gets absorbed into a kind of samadhi, which is not like the samatha samadhi, in which there's one uniform, unchanging object, but there's constantly changing objects arising and falling away, but the mind is just completely absorbed in that change of phenomena, and is called markless or signless, because, according to the commentary, because it lacks the sign of permanence. And so one thinks, I am one who gains the markless or signless concentration, and then again one becomes intimate with others, loosens up, and then lust invades the mind, and one gives up the training and returns to the household life. And I like the simile here. Okay, so we can sort of modernize it. Okay, so the simile in the text says, suppose a king or a royal minister is traveling along a highway with a large army, and he sets up camp for the night in a forest thicket. So because of the sounds of the elephants, horses, charioteers, and infantry, and the drums and so on, you don't hear the sound of the crickets. But once the army, the king with his army moves past, and you return to the quiet of the forest thicket, then you can hear the sound of the crickets again. So if we modernize this, suppose there's a busy highway with a lot of traffic going by during the day, early part of the night. Okay, early part of the evening, you don't hear the crickets, but then you come to midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., not much traffic. Then you can start hearing the sound of the crickets coming from the lawn or from the forest. And then once the traffic begins again, then you don't hear the sound of the crickets. And so I guess the sound, the noise from the army encampment, that is like the power of the markless concentration, which drowns out the sound of the crickets. The sound of the crickets are like the thoughts of lust that lead one to disrobe. And so once the power of that concentration diminishes because one neglects one's practice and starts associating with others, then those thoughts have the chance to reappear just like the sound of the crickets reappear. Okay, so that takes care of Maha Kotthita's discourse. And now the text tells us this is the reason why Maha Kotthita gave this discourse. It seems that Citta, this Venerable Citta, perhaps he was one who was able to attain all of these stages of jhana and even the signless concentration. But at a later time, he gave up the training and returned to the household life. And so then the other monks came to the Venerable Maha Kotthita and they asked him, were you able to read Venerable Citta's mind, and you understood that that even though he gains these various meditative attainments, that he's going to give up the training and return to the lower life? Or did the deities, the devas, report this to you? And then Maha Kotthita says, both were the case, that I was able to read his mind with my own mind, and I knew that he gained those meditative attainments, the 4 jhanas and the signless concentration, and yet he would give up the training and return to the household life. And also Devas reported this to me. Okay, then the monks, the friends of this Venerable Citta, they come to the Buddha and they tell him that the Venerable Citta, even though he gained all of those meditative attainments, he gave up the training and returned to the household life. But the Buddha says, before long, Citta will think of renouncing, of taking ordination again. And so sure enough, the text tells us that afterwards, this Citta Hattisariputta shaved off his hair and beard, put on the ochre robes, and went forth again into the homeless life. And then before long, he attained arhatship, and he knew that the birth has been finished, the spiritual life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. there is no more coming back to any state of being, and he became one of the arhats. And the commentary says that Chitta returned to lay life 7 times and went forth 7 times. And sort of he's famous amongst all of the monks because he is the one who, his sort of specialization, his claim to fame, is he is the one who disrobed and reordained the maximum number of times in the early Buddha Sangha. So the commentary has to be wrong in saying that he returned to lay life and reordained 7 times, because the way I figure it, okay, he ordains once, returns to lay life once, reordains, ordains a 2nd time, returns to lay life a 2nd time, or then ordains a 3rd time, 4th time, 5th time, 6th time, 7th time. But the 7th time, he doesn't return to lay life a 7th time. Rather, the 7th time that he ordains, that time he achieves arhatship, then he doesn't revert to lay life again. So he ordains 7 times, but returns to lay life 6 times. The 7th time he ordains, he remains a monk until his passing away. Okay, we can see if there are any questions. So any questions that come up? Okay, so I see first is TJ Tung. Yeah, please, you have to unmute.
Sorry, Bhante, I didn't ask any question.
Oh, you didn't have a question. Okay. So we go to Helen Rosen.
Hi, thank you, Bhante. This is more a brief comment than a question. It seems like such a mundane observation and yet so important and so relevant to everyday life in the difficulty of knowing people, really, right? And how people behave in one situation is not necessarily how they're going to behave in another situation. And it's kind of a caution about, assuming that you know somebody because you know them in one situation, because they may behave very differently somewhere else. I just think it's a very astute observation.
Yeah, that is very, very true. People will behave very, very differently when they think they're under observation and when they think they are out on their own or free from observation. Yeah, that is very true. Okay, so we'll take Gita and you unmute.
Yes, Bhante. Thank you for the beautiful teachings. Teruvan Sarnai Nama Buddhaya, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu. Bhante, I have just one question. Doesn't the Buddha have an allowance if you have sickly parents that you could actually go take care of them?
Say again.
Doesn't the Buddha have an allowance if a monastic has sick parents and they need to be looked after and tended to? That doesn't he allow them to go and take care of them and then come back when they're able? Is there not such a allowance under compassion to take care of your parents?
They can go as a monastic and look after their parents. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, they don't have to disrobe to look after the parents. They could stay with the parents and look after them, and they could even go on alms round to collect food, to provide food for the parents if the parents have no other way of getting their food.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Bhante. That was it. I just want to clear it up. Thank you.
Okay, then we'll take Samangi Munasingha.
Yes, a quick question, Bhante. Sorry, excuse my ignorance, and I have forgotten. So, to attain arahatship, do you have to leave the lay life, or I thought there were lay people who did attain arahatship?
Okay, there are a few cases okay, there are a number of suttas which show that there have been lay people who have gone all the ways up to the third, of the 4 stages, gone up to the third stage and remained as householders at the third stage, the stage of non-returner. There are a few cases reported in the suttas of lay people who attain arhatship as lay people, but after attaining arhatship, then they immediately or very soon after look for the opportunity to take ordination.
Okay.
Because it seems that once you become an arahat, then you don't have that incentive to look after yourself in a household situation.
I see. I see. Thank you.
Okay, Samantha Jayatelaka. Samantha? Okay, maybe she didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Bhante, I forgot to unmute. I was just wondering, as a layperson, is it really difficult to enter
My
stream
phone is
entry
ringing.
or... Oh, sorry, Bhante.
How do you stop it?
Press the...
Okay. Because I'm always
Press,
getting a scam call. Please go again.
sorry, Bhante. I just want to quickly ask, as a layperson, to get into the stream entry or advance in their practice, how can one still be a householder and then live in sort of fairly in seclusion? Is that how if to go about if you want to advance in the practice?
Okay,
What
that's,
advice can Bhante give?
and I just really have a few minutes. Just within the context of a household life, you have to still find time to devote to the practice. And if there are lay people with very strong faculties who are able to do it even while living the household life, and if the opportunity arises, then one would be able to go off into devote a certain period to a dedicated retreat, even if it's a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, whereby one can strengthen one's powers of samadhi and insight. And if one's paramis and merits are sufficient, one can reach any of those stages.
Lovely, thank you. And just lastly, Bhante, just from the retreat, did Bhante say you were going to send some extra documents on the blessing? And other recordings available?
Wait, I'm having really...
Was Bhante going to share any?
Also know if the documents from the retreat, the materials you were sharing, would be sent to.
I sent them to the coordinator for the retreat.
We haven't received.
So you haven't received, then I'll have to remind her to send them out. Okay, yeah, I had sent them to the coordinator for the retreat, and she was supposed to share them with the people. She has the registration list. So I'll remind
Thank you. And
to send
thank
to...
you, Bhante. And the recordings, are the recordings, will they be sent as well, Bhante?
You want to know if the recording will be.
That is the links to the recordings, the documents and the recordings together. Yeah, they should all
Wonderful.
come as part of one package.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. Sadhu.
Okay, was there any other? Okay, then we're going to have to end the, we'll end the session for the day. So we're going to end with the dedication of the merits, the sharing of the merits. So I'll recite the verses for sharing the merits. So we share the merits with the devas, the nagas, and again with all beings, asking them to protect the Buddha Sasana, the Buddha's teaching, and to protect ourselves and others, and to protect the world. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu sasana. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu te sanam. Akasata Chabumata Deva Nagamahitika Punyanta Manumoditva Chirangra Kantu Mang Parang Dukkha Pata Chani Dukkha Baya Pata Chani Baya Soka Pata Chani Soka Hantu Sabe Pipanino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we'll do 3 bows to the Buddha. And so we could stand, those of us here.
And a bow to Bhante. Thank you. Bow to Bhante.
Okay, so thank you all for joining.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Thank you,
Everyone,
Bhante.
sat night. Have a good lunch.
Thank
you,
you,
Bhante.
Next week. Be
Enjoy
safe.
the
Be
lunch,
well.
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Be safe, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Budaya. Take care,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
We all love you, Bhante.
Okay, take care. Okay.
Take care. Bye.
Good lunch, Bhante.
Okay, so I'm going to end the session now.
Thank you, Bhante.